Are you hungry for more Space Engineers 2 V-Rage 3 information? Well, you're in the right place. I'm going to deliver you today the latest information from V-Rage 3, and it's an exciting one. We're going to be having a look at more water physics, some more parts to do with the graphics engine, and we're going to have a little bit of crash testing. Now, Jan has released all this information on the Twitter page, and if you don't know who Jan is the lead programmer working on the V-Rage 3 engine. And a final disclaimer, Space Engineers 2 hasn't officially been announced, but everything is pointing in that direction, so I think it's safe to assume. Now, moving on, let's have a look at the first post on the 25th of March. It explains how they're busy optimizing the V-Rage 3 water to support large-scale changes. So the example that they're using here is they delete the dam that we saw in a previous testing video, and you can see the water gushes on out down the valley. In my opinion, it does look a little bit like Jello in this occasion, but I'm guessing graphic settings are on low so they can get the maximum performance out of the water. But just look how it flows through this valley, filling it up, and every crevice or every height difference, you see how the water slows down in that area where it detects another area where the water could flow into, it then starts flowing down into that area. And it leaves me some questions about how is this water going to be sourced? Is the source going to be infinite, so it'll continue flowing infinitely, or will the source drain down? Will the sort of area that's already high up in the water, will the water level drop? There's a lot of questions with this system, and I can't wait to see them answer it. Now, moving on, Jan talks about that they were working on sort of 1 cell thick water in caves, and you can see there's 2 examples of the caves right here. Just imagine building a base in a cave and having a boat that can go in and out of this cave, some pirate activities perhaps. So moving on, Jan also talks about global illumination, and with the specular reflections, he's explaining how the lighting now is coming together. And a quick look at this, you can see it's much better than before. Then Jan moves on to a little V-Rage 3 crash. And what's interesting about this one, he explains how, once again, it's going to be different depending on what material you hit. So landing on this sand is a much safer landing, but you can still see the ship fragment. That's pretty damn cool. Now, in this next experimentation, you can see their implementation of just a distance-based fog and nice refraction on the water surface. It's also our first time below the water in all these test videos. You can get a bit of an idea of just how the lights cut out down here, and you can get this really sort of below the depths type vibe from underneath the water, and you can also see the reflection of the light on the water as you come up from below as well. This is really fascinating stuff, and with all the things that you'll be able to do, from submarines to building boats to incorporating water, capturing water in designs, perhaps you'll have some water turn. You can see the ripples in the water here are still a little bit maybe work in progress there. You can see the sideways ripples. It does look great from above, but the way the water's sort of waves are rippling from side to side, there's definitely going to be needing some work in this area. It's going to be interesting how they populate under the water as well. Will there be rocks? Will there be coral? Have they considered some sort of fish or wildlife? I mean, these are all things for the future here, but you can just get a sense of this gloomy, watery environment. Something as well to consider will be sound, the sound of underwater, and how light will be reflected underwater as well. So some interesting things, and it's nice to see them continuing the development with the water sources. Now, talking about water, they've also had a little bit of testing done with strengths and directions, so they can change of course the flow, but they're doing a bit of wind and velocity testing here, and they're showing how it's affecting the water. So you could be sailing on a calm day, and the next minute you could be into a violent storm with some high winds. It'll be really interesting to see how the weather affects the sort of gushes of water. When it rains, will we see streams and things forming? Is that a bit too far-fetched? And then finally, there's an experimentation on a little bit of water velocity, and you can see how the water is gaining velocity, perhaps in a river or a waterfall. But let's move on. Now, I think it's also important here to address the comments that I have seen in these update videos, and the players who are commenting seem to fall in a number of different camps, and it's also safe to sort of assume that sometimes the loudest screams from some of these players who are commenting aren't always a representation of the whole of the community. On top of this, I am a little bit biased because I really do enjoy playing Space Engineers, and it's what's allowed me to play it for the last 10 or so years. Yes, 10 years, isn't that mad? But the community at the moment are still very divided on the direction of what Keen Software House are doing and what's going to happen with the first Space Engineers game. So I think that's a good sort of starting point of this discussion. So we've got 3 camps of players. We've got the I'm not going to buy another Keen product until Space Engineers is complete and I can do everything that I want in it. You've got the other camp that's just a wait and see, and that's where I sit. I always think it's best to just wait and see what happens, and then you can make your mind up as things develop. And then you've got number 3, is sort of take my money, give me Space Engineers 2, give me all these features. So yeah, it's quite divided how the community are feeling about V-Rage 3 and the core Space Engineers game. But it is safe to assume that the frustrated players do have some grounds to be frustrated, because there is a lot of secrets about the first Space Engineers game that are not kind of uncovered to a beginning player. Now, when you first start out in Space Engineers and you start building your base, you don't experience much in terms of performance issues. But when you've built what you wanted and realized that there is really not too much to do with it, there's no story, no quest line, you then usually turn to an online server. Perhaps you join the LSG server, for instance, and we run different seasons and different battles, and we create a reason for players to actually continue to build and play the game. But we also understand that when battles get bigger and more players get involved, there is a dramatic drop in sim speed and performance. And I've been playing this game that long, and lots of these veteran players have been playing, is that we're used to playing at a lower sim speed and a lower sort of performance level. But on top of this, is that something we should really be accepting? Shouldn't we be accepting a game that isn't a slideshow in a lot of these more advanced and high-tech battles? Should we be accepting that at all? It's a difficult question, and a lot of players become frustrated that the game and the performance levels are not improving in that larger sort of scale. But if you do play this game as a co-op or with a small group of friends, perhaps against some AI missions, or you play a scenario, you'll never notice some of these performance issues. Like one of the performance issues that we're suffering with on the server now, and we've been suffering quite a long time, is hydrogen thrusters. When a large group of players get all in one location with hydrogen thrusters, there seems to be some sort of updating issue where the data from the hydrogen tanks to the thrusters, as that updates, it sends it to the server side. That causes all the players to lag out. So I understand where this frustration is coming from the player base, and I can understand why players probably don't want, some of them don't want to pick up another Keen Software House game. But the other issue that Space Engineers runs into is, since they've drip fed us content over the years and they've constantly kind of leveled up our expectations with introducing AI, planets, one after one, is players don't know when Space Engineers is actually going to stop developing. And because there is no end in sight for the development, players are kind of holding on to the edge of the seat going, oh, I hope the feature I really fancy gets integrated into Space Engineers. And because of that, it's a little bit frustrating for them, and then they get to a point where they see that their feature's never going to happen, and they kind of lose interest and fall off the sort of face of the earth with Space Engineers. So it's going to be a difficult one for development, and I think the biggest challenge still is going to be, how are they going to wrap up Space Engineers and keep the players happy? Because officially they've released Space Engineers. All these updates, these extra DLCs are not features that were ever intended officially for the game. They're just things that are added as a quality of life. I mean, if we look back over the years, this game has improved massively. From when I first played this, there was no multiplayer. It was just a single player. The blocks were very simplistic. The weapons were simplistic. We didn't even have weapons in the early alpha stages. So to see this game and play it like now, it is a dream of a game. So I think that two things are either going to happen. Keen Software House are going to have to make a big decision and end Space Engineers on an absolute bang, a great send-off note with lots of updates, lots of little features and fixes for some of the problems. Or if they end on this sort of sizzle out where there's not much information, nothing's going to happen, the community will just fall and drop away, as sad as that sounds, until, of course, V-Rage 3 or Space Engineers 2 or whatever they decide to do. There'll be a big spike, but there'll be a lot of resentment and bitterness from the community who go, oh, well, you just kind of let Space Engineers fade away. So they need an endgame in sight. They need a big update. They need a final sort of touch, fix some of the remaining problems, and send Space Engineers on its way before this V-Rage 3 Space Engineers 2 comes out. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, and the longer they wait, the more the community sorts of disintegrates and falls apart, and more of them go to the side of hating on Space Engineers rather than supporting it. So I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I've talked a little bit out of my heart towards the end there, and I really hope that Keen do their best to bring this game together, finish it off nicely, but also develop Space Engineers 2. Anyway, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. If you've enjoyed this content, you've enjoyed this presentation, and you're as passionate about Space Engineers as I am, jump in the comment section, let us know how you feel, and make sure you hit that like button as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.